This is the Building Automation Monthly podcast with Phil Zito, episode 77. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking through several of the most common IT questions I get from building automation system professionals. So everything I mentioned can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com / 77. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com / the number 77. So today's episode is not going to have a tech tip because I am going to be pretty much giving a ton of different tech tips as part of this episode. But what I wanted to do is just explore, a lot of the different IT questions I've been asked. So, as you may or may not know, I run a online training program called Information Technology for Building Automation System Professionals. And that's open for enrollment until July 14th, at which time I'm going to be doubling the price and closing down the course for a little bit because I'm going to be taking in my July class. Now, I've had a lot of good questions from folks when I've been going through this program. I've had tons and tons of conversations about all sorts of things. And as I start to think about the topics that I've talked about, I can kind of break them down. I guess you'd say really like four different areas is where I can kind of think of them. And the main areas, they are networks, servers, remote access, and then I would call it kind of I guess I call it integration. So let's dive through kind of the network questions that I've been getting. So last night, so I'm recording this on a Saturday morning, and last night I had my first webinar. Actually, technically it was my second webinar. This is too funny. So I go to host a webinar on Wednesday to train folks on how to communicate with IT. And this is a webinar I'm going to be doing every week going forward. I think I'm going to do it on Wednesdays. And essentially, I'm teaching the 3 secret strategies that I've come up with to effectively communicate with IT and know what you need to know about information technology. Well, so I'm on this webinar and I'm talking and I'm going through it for like an hour and a half, and I can see everyone in the webinar, but no one's responding. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? Apparently, there is some sort of glitch with the webinar software. And like once I got out of the webinar after an hour and a half of speaking, because I kind of just get in my zone and talk, that's just kind of my personality. And I get out of this webinar and everyone's like, where's Phil? I can't see his screen. And the one guy who could hear me is like, I could hear him. It's pretty interesting. So that was funny, especially considering it was a webinar on IT. So then, last night when I'm recording this at least, so that was Friday, July 7th, 2017. Oh, I went and recorded the webinar, and then I kind of hung around for a long time after the webinar with a couple folks who I know who have been long-term subscribers to the podcast and to the blog, and we just talked about all sorts of things. Well, we got to talking about networking, and we started talking about IP controls and, what are the things that you have to be aware of? How do you deal with things on a production network? So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the questions that were asked last night and how I responded to them, because they were pretty interesting questions. And whether you know it or not, this IT thing, it's going to come and it's going to smack the BAS industry like a freaking 2x4. I mean, there are a lot of people who are just going to get smacked upside the head because they refuse to learn information technology. It's kind of like back when you had the pneumatics to DDC shift and kind of all the pneumatics guys were left looking for jobs or having to learn DDC, and all these new DDC folks were going and getting the big salaries. Well, it's basically going to be like that, but on steroids, because you have a bunch of different things. It's not just a shift from a different control system to a new control system. It's actually a shift in network architecture. It's a shift in how servers are done. It's a shift in all of this different integration stuff. I mean, there's several major categories of shifts happening at the same time, and they're all falling on the BAS folks. And whether you want to accept it or not, these things are coming your way. The manufacturers are going to continue to release IP-enabled controls, Wi-Fi-enabled controls, more robust APIs. So, like I said, we're talking last night. One of the guys, Kai, he says to me, he's like, I think Kai asked this. It was a little late, so it may have been Lee who asked this, but it was basically, hey, I've got 50 IP controls and they're on the production network. How do I make sure that they don't interfere with my customer's network? So what's going on there, when you hear production network, that's just another way of saying the customer network, right? So that's the customer network, production network. That's a term IT likes to use. And that's why it's so important for you to understand this lingo, so that when you're in a conversation with IT, when you're having these conversations across the table, you're talking at the same level. Because that's one of the big problems I see, is that folks aren't talking at the same level with IT. And so then there's this tension that doesn't need to be there. There's these problems of communication that don't need to be there. And just in general, it just creates issues. But so he asks about that, and I say, well, here's the thing. You could be on the production network. You could physically be on the production network, but logically be on your own network. Now, for some of you who understand IT, you get what I just said. That it makes complete sense to you. For the rest of you, and this isn't a dig on you, so don't take this as me like, you don't know IT. No, it's not that at all. It is rather me just saying, hey, if you don't understand this, that's totally cool. I'm about to explain it to you. So when I say physically you're on the production network, but logically you're on a different network, what I mean is that physically your devices are plugged into a switch that is on the production network. However, logically, you use a thing called a subnet and a VLAN, right? So a subnet is a sub portion of a main network, and a VLAN is a virtual LAN. So a local area network is a physical construct. It's a switch with a bunch of network connections that go to host devices, and that would be your physical local area network. Now, within that physical local area network, you can have a bunch of VLANs. Now, the really cool thing about VLANs is they can stretch across multiple physical LANs, and while I'm not here to give you a lecture on network technologies, the important thing is I sat and I said, hey, Kai, you know what? Just put them in a VLAN, and then they are logically segmented from all the traffic. None of the traffic on the other VLANs or on the production network will be able to see them unless you want it to see them. And then you will be essentially logically isolated. And I said, and if you're worried about any quality of service issues, that's essentially where you have limited bandwidth that can go through what's called a trunk. And a trunk is a network connection, a physical network connection that connects two switches or a switch to a router. It basically connects network devices. And I said, well, you know what? If you're worried about quality of service, like maybe IP cameras being on the same trunk, because multiple VLANs can be on a single trunk. So while you're logically isolated, you're not physically isolated. Now, that's not a big deal, because logically isolating stuff is how the majority of the industry works. I mean, if everyone physically isolated every different type of traffic, you would have these huge networks, and it just wouldn't be scalable or doable. It'd pretty much shut down the internet. So what I said is, what you do is you just work with IT to route your traffic to a trunk that is not heavily congested. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, there's these things called routes, right? Routes can tell your IP traffic where to go. And essentially, when you're telling your IP traffic where to go, you're basically telling it the path to take. It's like GPS for network communications. And this GPS, you can do one of two things. You can have a routing protocol that automatically detects traffic and shortest path and stuff like that, and automatically negotiates routes for you. Or you could just automatically know that there's no heavy traffic across this route, so I'm going to go and statically map this route for my BAS traffic. So that's kind of how I answered that question. And, so then we got into some other questions. We started talking about some network connectivity things. Specifically, we were talking about VPNs and DMZs and proxies. And for those of you who this is kind of new to you, though, all those concepts, I'm going to kind of break it down for you. So like I mentioned, you have a physical and logical network, but that network is internal to the business, right? So you have really two types of IP addresses. You have internal IP addresses, and those are not routable to the external network, meaning they can't be seen by some random person on the internet. And then you have external public IP addresses. Now, the reason you use internal IP addresses is twofold, right? You don't want people outside of your network to be able to see all your devices. But there's also, at least with IPv4, there's like a 2 billion IP address limit for the entire world. And so folks use subnetting to create these private network classes that can be duplicated again and again and again. And then you use this technology called network address translation, which basically, it's like a data map, right? It's like whenever you go and you say, well, SFF or SF-S means supply fan status. You create that data map. Well, NAT essentially is creating that data map between your public IP address and your private IP address. And I go into this a lot more in the course, but essentially that's what NAT is. So we started talking about VPNs, as I mentioned, proxies, DMCs, all that stuff. Well, what a VPN is, right? A VPN is a virtual private network. So if you think of your private network, right? When you have an internal network, that's a private network. That's a subnet on a private IP range. Well, if you want to extend that network outside of your business, but you don't want to physically extend it, then what you're doing is you're using VPN technologies. And then you are essentially creating a virtual network segment outside of your physical network. So what this looks like is that you take your VPN and essentially the external person connects to that VPN, and then that VPN wraps all their data traffic in something like HTTPS TLS, which that's Hypertext Transport Protocol Secure, and then, if I remember correctly, TLS is Transport Layer Security. It's the newer version of SSL. And basically, that is a symmetric encryption, not asymmetric encryption, but symmetric encryption. And essentially what that means is you're using a public and a private key to basically encrypt your data. And if you have access to the key, you can unlock the encrypted data. And that's how it all works. I'm not going to get much deeper than that right here because that would just kind of start to overwhelm you with cybersecurity techie stuff. But essentially what happens is you extend this network, the person logs in with their credentials, and then they become basically part of the network. All their traffic is wrapped in this HTTPS wrapper. So it's all encrypted as it travels across the interweb, the internet. Now there's really two ways you could do this. There's called IPsec tunneling, which is you basically create a unbroken tunnel of HTTPS that goes from endpoint to endpoint. And what I mean by that is it goes from your host to the switch, to the router, to the next router, to the next router, to the VPN switch, and into the private network. And then there's point-to-point encryption, and that's essentially where at each network device you decrypt and re-encrypt the data. So, I mean, neither one is necessarily better than the other. It just depends on what you're trying to do, whether you have control and you have trust of those network devices that you are doing that encrypt, decrypt on. But essentially, the important thing here, right, is that it extends the network. Now, contrast this to what's called a VNC, and that is a virtual network connection. And this is things like TeamViewer, this is things like GoToMyPC, where essentially you have this agent, and that's like a snippet of software that's sitting on your BAS server, and it basically punches a hole out to the network. And this sounds much more insecure than it actually is. So when I say it punches a hole, I mean it's not like super insecure, really bad. But basically, it creates this outbound connection. And interestingly enough, this is the same way a lot of hackers work, is they get inbound and they create basically this outbound connection that then they can dial back into once they have access to the network. But essentially what VNC does is it creates this outbound connection that then you can enter a meeting number or an ID number and a password number that is randomly generated, and that allows you to remotely connect to that single device. It's very similar to RDP, which is a remote desktop protocol. Now that's a Microsoft protocol, RDP, but what you would be looking at is like, oh my gosh, what is that protocol here? I could Google it in a couple seconds, but oh, it's like 800 something. It's port 800 something. I have to take a look, but why memorize what I can Google in a couple seconds? Anyways, the point here, though, what I was getting at is they were asking questions about basically the Fox protocol, which is a Tritium protocol. And if you're on a VPN, should you use HTTPS Fox or should you use HTTP Fox? And basically what was going on is they were on a VPN and then they were RDPing into the BAS, and then the BAS had the Fox protocol data from the server to the different JASes. And so basically what they were trying to figure out is, should they HTTPS that or not? And my answer was, well, it depends on the environment. If you're on a VLAN and you're segmented from all other traffic, and this isn't like a super secure site, and you're not riding over public Wi-Fi, then you probably don't need HTTPS for your Fox protocol. You're probably good with HTTP, because if someone's into your internal network and then they are on your BAS network, you got bigger issues than them sniffing your Fox protocol and being like, oh, look what I see. You got issues that they're on your freaking network. This always makes me chuckle, like when folks are like, well, if I could physically access your BAS, I could plug into the USB port and hack your BAS, so you need to shut down your USB port so you're secure. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, sure, that is true. If you can get physical access to a machine, you can pretty much hack any machine. But isn't the bigger issue that they're in your data closet? I mean, you would think that that would be the bigger issue, that there's like a lot of security points, a lot of layers of security that have failed for them to be in your data closet. So for that to be happening, it's funny to me how people focus in on these little minute details and miss kind of the bigger scenario. Like, oh, you know what? You left your safe in your house unlocked, and that's pretty insecure. Well, the bigger issue is that they're in your freaking house going through your safe, right? It's not that you left your safe unlocked. That's not the big issue. The big issue is that they're in your house and you don't even know that they're in your house. That is the bigger issue. So back to what I was saying. So you got this VPN, and then you use what's called a demilitarized zone. And this is basically a VLAN segment that is separated from the production network where you allow people to connect into. And then essentially you use what is called a proxy server. And I go through the several different types of proxy servers in the course. But essentially a proxy server is going to filter traffic. I'm sure you've experienced this if you've ever been at work and your company uses like a Barracuda proxy server for web surfing, and you try to go to like weather.com and it blocks ads, or it just doesn't let you go to sites because it's like, this site is insecure. Well, basically what's going on is that there's a whitelist or a blacklist. And whitelist is when you keep a list of all the sites people can go to, and then you block everything else. And a blacklist is where you keep a list of all the sites that people can't go to, and you let them go to anything else. It depends on your security posture as to which one you take. So basically you log into this VPN, right? Log into this DMZ, you connect to this proxy server, and then you RDP into the building automation server. So you've got multiple different security controls taking place. And when I say security controls, I don't mean like BAS field controllers. And I've had folks in the past, both when I was writing my book, when I've talked on podcasts, and they're like, Phil, don't call them security controls. I'm like, well, what do you want me to call them? And they're like, well, call them security mechanisms or security safeguards. I'm like, but no one in the IT industry says that. You'd look like a freaking goober. So that's the thing, is you don't want to be the guy who walks in there and is like, I need 5 subnets. And it's like, I think I was like, what? What do you mean you need 5 subnets? And they're like, I need 5 subnets for my supervisory devices. And they're like, first off, I have no idea what a supervisory device is. And then second off, I can obviously tell you don't know what a subnet is because you don't do a subnet per device. So, I mean, that's where you got to kind of understand the lingo and use the proper lingo. So, like I said, controls, basically, cybersecurity is all about risk, right? It's all about going and reducing risk, mitigating risk. You basically look at what's going on, like the vulnerabilities. So, basically, you would look at vulnerabilities, and are these vulnerabilities exploitable? And if they are, what is the potential for them to get exploited? And then what is the damages that could happen? And then basically that becomes your risk profile. And then you go and decide on your acceptable risk threshold. What is an acceptable level of risk for you? And then once you know that, then you put these controls in place. And there's basically logical controls, administrative controls, and physical controls. Physical controls are like, I'm going to barricade the door. I'm going to glue my USB ports shut. Logical controls are like, I'm going to put in a firewall. I'm going to use antivirus. And administrative controls are, hey, the BAS guys are not going to all use the same username and password. You're going to log out of the BAS when you're done using it and not leave it logged on. You're going to change your passwords every 60 days. Those are administrative controls, so you can kind of see that. So essentially, like I said, you connect to this VPN, you connect to the DMC, you connect to the BAS, and that is how that securely goes along. So another question I have received is what is the difference, right, between APIs and what is the difference between protocol integrations? And this is a really important point to grasp because when you think about it, all the rage, all the marketing out there is like, we've got an open API. And it's like, woo, got an open API. That's, you could save the world now. But the thing is that an open API doesn't do diddly squat for you. Actually, honestly, open APIs can actually cause more problems than protocol integrations. And here's why. So with a protocol integration, as long as everything's conforming to the protocol, if I want to interface a BACnet IP lighting and a BACnet IP BAS system, as long as they're conforming to the BACnet protocol, I can pretty much guarantee that the data sets are going to match up. An analog value is going to be an analog value. Yeah, the names may be different, and I may need to go and do some like space versus zone normalization. But I'm not going to have, my AV value for my lighting is an int 32, and then my AV from my BAS is like a float, and then I've got to do, some casting of different data types, and that basically is programming speak for I need to take one data type that has certain constraints and I need to convert it to a different data type so the two things could talk. Otherwise, they won't be able to connect because there's a data type mismatch. Well, when you're dealing with integrations, so an application programming interface, what that is that is an interface to the programming inside the application. You see how I did that? That's pretty awesome. I just reversed it. That's pretty cool. I'm proud of myself. Hey, I was up late last night, so I'm easily amused sometimes. So as I was saying, a API is an interface to the programming within the application. What do I mean by that? Well, within an application, you have this set of functionality. You have what are called functions, right? And so when you write code, most code is classful, and you'll have a class, you'll have properties, you'll have functions, and basically functions call basically they tell the program to do certain things. Well, you expose these functions via an API, and then another person can, as long as they understand your data model, they can do what's called parsing the API. Basically, it's where they go into the API, they pull data, and they get a return set of data, and then they parse through that, meaning their computer program reads through that and essentially goes and pulls in data and assigns it to the right property. But then what you have to do is you have to look at that data set, you have to look at those points, and you've got to understand the data model, and then you've got to do what's called a data adapter pattern. Basically, this is code that you write that then is going to say, okay, well, your string, and I need you to be a int 16, and that's a different data type, and string's a different data type. So I'm going to do a cast from string to int or from int to string. And essentially what is happening there is now you are manually doing data conversions. And that's where creating integrations between APIs becomes really difficult, whereas you don't have that with protocol integration. So, when everyone's like, ooh, Internet of Things and everything has an API, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. Have you ever seen folks out there in the field writing a ton of code? I would say, 10% of the folks in the field can actually get out there, write C Sharp, write Java, and those are backend languages, or write HTML, write JavaScript, write jQuery. And that's front end languages. And of course, you've got things like if, then that, or Node, Red, JS, which essentially are visualization layers on top of scripting code. And scripting code is where you write little code snippets that aren't full blown programs. They just run on demand. They're little just snippets of code. You'll see this all the time whenever you're loading up a website where it runs a snippet of code. You may not see it, but it's actually happening behind the scene. If you have a box that opens up, like if you go to my blog and you go to scroll off the page, what is happening is there's some jQuery running behind the scenes that is watching the cursor location of your mouse. And if your mouse leaves the web browser, then what it does is essentially it says on alert, mouse leave area, and then basically it opens up a window, and it creates a pop-up that opens up a window, and then that window displays some text saying, hey, you sure you want to leave? You should take advantage of this free training because it's free and it's good training. But essentially, there's not a lot of people who know how to do that stuff, right? And I don't think every BAS person should know how to do that. I mean, it'd be pretty cool if they knew how to do that. But, the pay versus skill difference there, an average technician making 30 to 50 a year, depending on where they live. And I'm talking US, I'm not talking like overseas where you maybe make more, maybe make less. But that average technician, if they understand all those coding principles, they're going to go find a coding job and be making 80, 90,000 a year starting off. But here's my point with this, is that you get all these people, IoT, analytics, APIs, and it's just a bunch of freaking buzzword bingo. Because the thing is that while all that stuff's cool and all that stuff's awesome, there's just not a lot of people out there who can actually write the code to make this stuff happen. Sure, there's system integrator outfits out there, but the reality is that those folks are the exception to the rule. And don't get me started on system integrators and how everyone calls themselves a systems integrator now, even though some of them are just doing basic installation and basic construction. I mean, definitely it sounds sexier and it sells more, but there's a difference between true system integrators who actually have coding backgrounds and are able to then go and actually make things happen versus folks who just carry a lot of different product lines that do protocol integrations. Those are two totally different skill sets. I'm not saying any one is necessarily better than the other, but they are two totally different skill sets. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to cover, because we're starting to come up on the 30-minute time window here, and I try to keep it around 30 minutes out of respect for your time, and, knowing that you can then kind of consume this in a car ride or whatever you're doing. So the next thing up is called databases. Now, I'm sure most of you know what databases are, right? If you've been in the BAS industry for more than like 2 years and you don't know what a database is, yeah. You should probably go pick up like databases for dummies because, not saying you're a dummy. That's not at all what I'm saying. Literally, the book is called Databases for Dummies. But, the thing is that databases are pretty much how every BAS is built and dependent on. I mean, if you think about it, right? At the back end, all of your data needs to be stored. Your properties, your point structure, your controller structure, all that information needs to be stored because essentially here's how programs work on the back end. There's probably way more detail than you want to know, but what happens is like one of my favorite design patterns is called the model view controller design pattern. And basically what it is you have a data model, right? And that data model tells you what all the data types are. And then you have a controller. And a controller essentially is going to handle all of the function calls, right? And then you have a view. And a view is going to dynamically create your web pages. So this is something that is used largely for web applications, and hence why I like it so much, because I do a lot of web applications. But what this is going to do is you're going to call some sort of function, and that function is going to then utilize the data model, and it's going to pull data from the database historically, or it's going to know the fully qualified reference, the FQR, to go and seek the data. Once again, that FQR is going to be stored in the database. And then it's going to dynamically generate that on a view. So essentially that's what's happening with a lot of building automation systems behind the scenes. That is the controller architecture, or the control architecture that, not the control architecture, that is the software architecture that is being utilized for a lot of these, especially these new microservices, which is basically where you break out all the different pieces of the BAS and you run them as independent services so that if you upgrade one service, it doesn't break everything else. Well, that's what's going on. And so all of that's dependent on databases as well. So you should at least understand, like, what is a relational database? What is a database? What is SQL? What are queries? I'm not saying you need to know how to write queries and do all this stuff, but you should at least understand what that stuff is, because that's going to make a huge, massive difference just in how you deal with IT, how you deal with your building automation system, whether you use a local or remote database, whether you use a cloud store database or an on-prem database, which means it's on site. These are all determining factors. All right, so it is about 7 in the morning, and I can hear my kids running around upstairs, and my wife, she's going for her master's in clinical social work, and Saturday and Sunday mornings are when she does her studies. So I can hear my 5-year-old running around, because for some reason my 5-year-old likes to get up like as soon as it's daylight, which just drives me freaking bonkers. I'm like, why can't you sleep? But I love her to death, but that drives me insane. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm just going to leave you all with this. I'm going to leave you all with two things. So depending on when you're listening to this coming Wednesday, I'm going to have a webinar talking about communicating with IT. And this could be a very valuable webinar. I had several people in it last night from when I'm recording this, and they were like, wow, the stuff you teach here, this is amazing. I could go apply this instantly. And I mean, this is stuff that you'll be able to apply regardless of where you're at technically. So I upgraded to a new webinar software, which gives me 500 spots now. So I really encourage you to come and attend this. Even if you are in my IT for Building Automation Systems professional course, I still think you'll take something valuable from this. So I'll encourage you to join that webinar Wednesday. That is July, what is that? The 12th at 8 p.m. So I encourage you to do that. Then what I also encourage you to do is, like I said, my July class for information technology for building automation system professionals is closing. And it is closing July 14th at noon, at which time I am going to be doubling the price to $9.97, and that's going to be the price going forward. Right now it's $4.97. And honestly, I'm not sure when I'm going to open it again. I'm on the fence whether I go to an evergreen model where it's permanently open, but it's open at $9.97, or if I go and I open it again in the fall, because right now I'm working on another course designed for building automation professionals. I really need to get that done. And so I'm not sure if this is going to be my last class for a little while. So if you're on the fence about learning information technology, I really encourage you to check this out. I was talking with Todd. I was talking with Todd, who is in the program the other day, and he runs a actual integration outfit for a Vicon dealer. And he was saying, Phil, I was asking him, I'm like, is what I ask for price wise comparable to the industry? And he's like, Phil, that's the wrong question. I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, the thing you should be asking is, what is the hourly rate of the average technician that's getting billed out? I'm like, well, it's 100 to 140, right? That's the average rate. It's like, what I've learned in your program allows me to save hours. He said, your program's $497, and if I spend 4 hours troubleshooting something that I discover via your program, I could troubleshoot in 15 minutes. I've saved the cost of the course. And I've gone and essentially been able to bill, especially if you're in service, for that other 4 hours to somewhere else. And I was like, holy crap, Todd. You should be writing my sales pages. I didn't even think about that. That literally flew by my head. I don't know why I didn't think about that. That's, sometimes you get so close to something that you forget. And I was like, yeah, that is really true. Because that is true. I mean, think about all the times you've spent, I've spent months dealing with IT sometimes. And if you're able to avoid that and not have to deal with that, I mean, that is a massive benefit. And the fact that it's online, self-paced, lifetime access, I mean, that's a plus too. So I encourage you to check that out. And that will be in the show notes at buildingautomationmonthly.com/77. All right, folks. So that is it for this episode. I thank you so much for listening. I really enjoy interacting with you, hearing your feedback. I'd love to see your comments on this episode, kind of more of my question and answer episode versus doing a teaching topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/77. Really encourage you to sign up for the webinar. I'll have a link for that there. And I also encourage you, if you are on the fence about this IT training program, with all my training programs, so I'll offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So I really encourage you to check it out. It's really cool. All right, folks, that's it. I am going to go take care of the kids. I got to mow the lawn. I think I got to go add salt to our thingy-mabobber. Yeah, that's a really cool term. Our water softener, I got to go do salt. I'm also really freaking hungry because I'm on this stupid, well, I call it stupid. I should be more positive. I'm on this no grain, no sugar diet because, so I follow Cliff Ravenscraft. I actually paid $2,000 for his podcasting A to Z course because I want to get better at podcasting. So I paid $2,000 for his course, and I start that next Monday. And so I follow him. I follow Mark Mason at Late Night Internet Marketing. I follow both of those people, and both of them have went through this kind of 90-day no sugar, no grains thing, and they've lost a lot of weight. Well, ever since I got out of the field and now I do more sort of program management, integration management, I have gotten much more, I've grown more horizontally than I've grown vertically. And that is not a good thing. So I am slimming down because it's gotten to a point right now. So I'm 35. And it's gotten to a point where I feel like I'm a 50-year-old. So I'm like, man, I really got to get this, I got to get this under control. Because it's like, if I don't get it under control now, it's not going to be good. There is nothing good that comes from being 5'8" and 250 some odd pounds. Although I've been told I do not look like I weigh 250 pounds. I've been told I carry it quite well. So I'm proud of that. But yeah, so I've got to do that, which then requires me to cook a lot of meat and vegetables and things like that. So that is also what I'm going to be doing this morning. Okay, probably way more detail than you want to know, but hey, that's my life. That's who I am. That's what I do. All right, folks. I am most likely going to be just recording one episode a week for the next couple weeks. I got a lot of stuff going on at work, so I just am having to use my nights for work stuff as well as my days. And that kind of puts me in a situation where I don't have as much free time to be going and recording extra podcast episodes. So, yeah, my only ask of you is hey, share this with folks you talk to. Let them know about this. I mean, sometimes I think Building Automation Monthly is like the best kept secret. The folks who listen to it and who subscribe to it give me great feedback. They're like, holy crap, this is amazing. But I definitely want to let more people know. So my ask of you would be to go and share this with the folks you know. Tell them about this. I mean, nowhere else are they going to be able to learn so much while they're driving from job site to job site or while they're sitting on the bucket doing point-to-point commissioning and checkout. So that's it, folks. I'm going to let you all go. I got a weekend to attend to. And as you all know, keep pushing, keep learning. You can improve, you can get better. It's a day at a time. Don't limit what you believe you can do because you are capable of so much more than what you are doing right now. And with that being said, I'm going to let you all go. I'm going to call it a day, and I will talk to you again in the next episode. Thanks so much. Take care.